Hi, everybody. Elon Musk has never been afraid to talk. And one of the things he likes to talk about is Iran and how he is against what is happening with the current protests in Iran. He has had several comments about Iran's leader, calling him delusional, saying that Iran is stoking the fires of hatred. He's even done things like turned on Starlink over Iran in what he says was public support for protesters to give them access to the internet and spread the word. However, behind the scenes, other things were happening. And in spite of US sanctions, it looks like Musk and X were actually providing verified, monetized accounts to Iranian leaders. And to discuss that, we have brought in again our first return guest, Miss Katie Paul, who is the director of the Tech Transparency Project. Welcome, Katie.
Thanks for having me back.
So, I want to briefly go back a little bit. We had Katie on before to talk about big tech and how Newtify apps were prominent on their platforms. That interview got stepped on quite a bit. So if you get a chance, we're going to promote that again so you can go back and see Ms. Paul's work and the work of her project on that. It's actually a fascinating discussion. But for right now, it looks like Musk is kind of playing both sides of the fence here, where in public, again, I am a hero of the Iranian people. I'm really trying to help you out, but it didn't seem to stop him from taking money from Iranian leaders. And in some cases, even making sure that they were verified before he took that money. And I would love for you to talk to us a little bit about your project's work and what you discovered.
Yeah, so I think to understand the issue here, we have to go back to pre-Musk Twitter, right? Back when it was Twitter, and a verified blue check mark wasn't something you could pay for. You could apply for it, right? You could say I'm an organization or I'm an important person, and you had to submit things, but it wasn't something that made the company any money. It was simply just to confirm the person who's using that account is who they say they are. After Musk took over Twitter and lost a lot of advertisers, the company was looking for new forms of revenue. And one of the things that he did was decide to make the blue check mark with the verification check mark something that was a paid service. So even if you had the blue check mark under old Twitter, if you wanted to keep it, you had to start paying for the subscription as of April 2022 when they fully instituted the paid version. So what's the benefit of the paid version? There are a couple tiers. There's the basic tier, which does not actually give you the check mark. So you could be there are people out there that could be paying that we can't see because of the check mark from the outside, but you still get the ability to post longer videos, to post more characters in a text, possibly be able to edit. And then there's the premium and premium plus tiers. Now, both of those come with a blue check mark. So you're paying for the check mark. And you're also getting the benefit of additional algorithmic amplification. Your responses in replies are going to be lifted to the top. You're going to be more likely for your account to be lifted when somebody searches something that's relevant to you. So you're paying for amplification in addition to this check mark. Now, when we look at X, I think it's pretty clear moderation is a problem. And certainly, even with the paid features, there's still problems. And what we found is over the past 3 years, Musk's X has been accepting payments from multiple sanctioned individuals, sanctioned companies, many of them linked to designated terrorist organizations. And this is critical because one of the arguments that we see anytime there's pushback on things with regard to X is that it's trying to kill free speech. This is about free speech. When it comes to US sanctions, the content of these accounts is completely irrelevant. In fact, legally, they're allowed to use the same publicly, freely available platform that we all use. The issue that is law breaking is the financial transaction with a sanctioned individual or entity. Even if they went through another country, so let's say the Iranians can't use a bank account in Iran and they use Turkey, doesn't matter. Still violation of the law. That's why companies have to do their due diligence. That's why there's an entire industry around sanctions compliance. In fact, X's premium verification services explicitly say you're not allowed to use them if you are a sanctioned individual, which is quite the honor system because are you going to say, oh, well, I'm a sanctioned terrorist. Guess this one's not for me.
Probably
Um,
not.
yeah, it's unlikely. And as a result, we see a lot of bad actors that are under US sanctions, our strictest sanctions regimes from the Office of Foreign Assets Control, which we refer to as OFAC, um, that are paying for this amplification service. Dozens and dozens of them. And that is certainly the case when it comes to these Iranian government officials who have been sanctioned by the US, including the current administration.
Yeah, and it's not like people didn't know who they were. I believe one of your reports mentioned the fact that several of them were ID verified, which was kind of a badge to say, like, hey, we know exactly who this person is. They had to show an ID, and proof of who they are. And yet they still decided to take their money despite being under sanctions and in a lot of cases being associated with terrorism.
Yeah, the ID verification part is a key point because that's actually something you can only get ID verified if you are already paying to subscribe to X Premium. So if you don't have a blue check mark, you can't apply for this ID verified service. And the way that that works, which X commissions, there's one of the companies that it uses for ID verification is an Israeli company called Authentics. And basically, you have to submit a selfie, a copy of a government issued ID, and prove you are who you say you are. So one of the accounts, and when we looked at this issue way back in 2024 now, in the midst of the war with Hamas, um, Hezbollah's leader, Hassan Nasrallah, who is now deceased, there was an account for Hassan Nasrallah in English that was ID verified by X. And it raised a few issues because X couldn't simply claim that Nasrallah's account was fake because this paid feature you want to use to verify was claiming he was ID verified. So it would completely, break the marketing on what they're claiming as ID verification. But it's certainly, considering it's an Israeli company that was doing the verification, it also raises questions. I'm pretty sure they would have known that it was Hassan Nasrallah. So is there just a selfie of him floating around this company?
Right.
Certainly likely. And he's not the only one. I mean, there are several different terrorist linked entities that we found that had ID verification. Others who have been sanctioned for many years. So last year there was one of the accounts for Saadi Gaddafi, who is a Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi's son. He also is sanctioned by the U.S. and has been for 15 years or so now. And he had an ID verified account. It was hyperlinked directly through his personal website. It was very clearly him. And so this is an additional paid feature that these individuals are using. But when it comes to the government officials, if you get on Twitter, X, you may notice that if you look at like a US congressman, they have these gray check marks. And the gray check marks are free and they are reserved for government officials. So when it comes to Iran, all of these government officials have the option to use that gray free check mark. They're not. X is instead taking money from them for the blue check mark when it doesn't have to. And so it's a choice in that instance to violate sanctions.
And the blue check mark, as you mentioned earlier, gives them more prominence. It extends their reach, if you will. Whereas the gray check mark is okay, we all know that this is the leader of so and so. The blue check mark actually promotes their posts and their responses, right?
The blue check mark, yeah, it gives them algorithmic amplification. Extended video is a key thing. We saw a lot of examples of Press TV, which is Iran's state media that is sanctioned by the US, had these secondary live streaming channels that would, even though Press TV is blocked, they created these secondary channels where they would just live stream or post 30 to 40-minute videos of speeches, of government leaders. And so for extremist groups, it's a huge propaganda boost. They're getting to pay for amplified propaganda. I mean, when you look back to when ISIS, for instance, was using social media very heavily to recruit, they could only dream of something like this. And other groups have capitalized on it. So For instance, the Nasrallah account that I mentioned, after that report came out and X removed the blue check mark but allowed the free account to exist, as I mentioned, they legally are allowed to. One of the things that it posted was, why were the blue checkmark subscriptions removed? It's hard to write when your words are limited to a number. Explicitly confirming that it was paying for the blue checkmark to write
Right.
longer propaganda.
Right. Yeah, and I think Wired picked up your reporting back then and pushed the story about Elon Musk and what was happening and behind the scenes. And I believe when they were contacted, they did remove check marks from a number of accounts, but not all of them. That tells me that one, they knew like, okay, we got caught and we should probably do something about it. And again, this happened back in 2024 with a number of groups and now has happened again. So it doesn't seem like anything has actually improved inside of their verification process or their, let's be honest, give a shit process when it comes to taking money from these individuals.
Yeah, unfortunately, we haven't seen any changes, and X has continued to provide these subscription check marks to sanctioned individuals and entities, a lot of them linked to terrorism. One of our reports on this back in 2025 looked at Houthis, also known as Ansar Allah. That's the Yemeni designated terrorist group. A lot of their leaders who were individually sanctioned were using it, but Ansar Allah's official website, which, yes, some terrorist groups do have official websites, terrorist groups that are designated by the US, because in some cases they have political arms and political parties. They linked to their official Ansar Allah Twitter account through their website. That account got fully taken down. And afterwards, the Houthis went on a tirade on their Telegram account saying that they were going to boycott X, that it was a human rights violation to remove their X account. That's not how human rights work. But it was clear again that this platform and the paid features for it were really critical for this group and their propaganda. So we're not just seeing the issue of an American company violating sanctions by financially transacting with a sanctioned entity. And to be clear, sanctions violations for those financial transactions can go in either direction. You can violate sanctions by paying somebody. You can also violate sanctions by receiving payment from somebody who's under US sanctions. And when we see that this is also such a valuable propaganda tool for a number of groups, and I should mention, whether it's Hezbollah or the Houthis, these are all Iranian proxies as well. So
Sure.
the fact that we're seeing these Iranian leaders who were also paying for this platform while simultaneously pushing an internet blackout in the country, it's pretty clear that this is an important mouthpiece for Iran and its proxies when it comes to kind of the global issue of extremism that's pushed by the regime.
Do you see I'm sure that there were inquiries made into, the US government about this. Has there been any kind of response or any indication that the current administration even cares?
Well, so when it comes, as I mentioned, OFAC is the entity, it's under US Treasury.
Yep.
We did submit some of the violation whistleblower claim with the violations that we identified to OFAC. And it does operate fairly, and it's a non-political entity. That said, as with many government entities, there have been a lot of job losses. And when you look right now at what OFAC, we did get confirmation that everything was received. But when you look right now at what their civil penalties enforcement is, they're like 4 or 5 years behind. They're pretty underwater. So the stuff that you're
Right.
seeing civil penalties enforced for now happened 5, 6 years ago. So
Yeah.
it's really hard to gauge because with the, inability for them to have the resources to address all of these, we're just, things are so far behind. But that allows these companies to continue violating US sanctions. And I think what's important to talk about here isn't just this is a legal violation, right? Sanctions are there for a reason. This is so that we can put pressure on bad actors, bad governments without using military force. And when it comes to the regime, put the communications aspect of what they're doing is an important piece of keeping them in check. And so this is actually undermining U.S. sanctions policy. And that is critical, not just because, we have this legal violation from an American tech company, they're undermining sanctions policy, but let's also keep in mind, just in January, it was announced that XAI has a Pentagon contract. And so we have an American company that is tied to openly violating sanctions and is simultaneously now has a Pentagon contract. So it's unclear, just based on the OFAC backlog, what the political will would be on this. But we really haven't seen much interest, even from what would be considered, big Iran hawks in Congress when it comes to this particular sanctions violation.
So, and you mentioned Iran hawks, people that, at least publicly say we're going to do everything that we can to bring down this regime. Have there been outreaches to those individuals to get a comment or to get some kind of feedback on just what you mentioned, the fact that there is a company that has, profited from uplifting the voices of Iranian leaders and terrorist groups that is now a part, has contracts with the Pentagon?
Yeah, so certainly we raised this issue to relevant members of Congress on both sides of the aisle. Obviously, Congress is dealing with a lot, so we don't always get
Sure.
replies. But Elizabeth Warren's office did give a comment to Wired about this. And actually, last year, in 2025, when we did our report focusing on the Houthis, one of the things that we highlighted in that report, worth mentioning here, is that these accounts were not just paying for the blue check mark. They also were using the X tips feature, which is where you can have a little
Right.
dollar icon and click on it, and people can give you tips, financial tips, whether it's through a payment platform or in these cases through different types of cryptocurrency. So you could actually tip a terrorist on X through cryptocurrency. And with what was happening with crypto bills last year, Senator Warren actually wrote a letter really concerned about the fact that there was no oversight of the fact that terrorist groups terrorists linked to the Houthis were requesting tips on X. One of the accounts we explicitly cited in the report, it says in Arabic in his profile, member of Ansar Allah. He had a blue check mark. In June, after a report came out, it was removed. He subscribed again the following month. So he still has his blue check mark, still requesting tips in crypto. This is very concerning because now that means there's the option for finances to flow the other direction as well, and the potential funding of these terrorist groups through the platform. And that is another serious concern when we're talking about the financing of these groups. And we know that even the US government has done studies about the role of cryptocurrency as an important tool for groups, the Houthis specifically, for raising funds and staying out of the financial system.
Have you seen anything from a legislative standpoint that could help address this? I know you mentioned Senator Warren talking about it in her commentary in the Wired article, but is there anything that you know is on a docket somewhere as far as that could even begin to address this? I mean, it's absolutely unnerving that there's a system out there that could potentially lead to the funding of terrorist groups, through tips from anonymous, semi-anonymous individuals. And I understand it's absolute chaos. It's a circus right now, but it feels like that's something that should be addressed. Is there anything that you see coming down the pipe, or that gives you some kind of hope for the future that this could be looked at or addressed?
Unfortunately, on this particular issue, we don't see anything on that front. But I think that's part of the bigger issue we see with tech, where we are years and years behind in terms of policy and regulation. And that's a broader issue. This is one of many really harmful things we are seeing from tech and how their business models operate and how they're profiting. Unfortunately, this is one piece of it. When we were looking at these accounts, these blue check mark Houthi accounts that were sanctioned on X last year, because the way the algorithm works, it threw other things at us. And one of the things that it threw at us that we came across were Houthi weapons traffickers who were selling U.S. military weapons on the platform that were then monetized with ads by X. Um, it's a this is even an additional piece of the puzzle. You have now not just weapons trafficking, but trafficking of U.S. military weapons that say property of U.S. government on them by a terrorist group openly on a tech platform. And X is not the only platform that is involved in these sanctions violations. In that case, we actually found that WhatsApp, which is owned by Meta, these weapons traffickers would direct you to their WhatsApp account, which were WhatsApp business accounts. And that's one of the few ways WhatsApp makes money is through the business accounts. And they actually had catalogs with the US military weapons in their WhatsApp business accounts, where you could pick which weapons you wanted and order through WhatsApp. Um, and so it's just an example of how the entire ecosystem of tech is being used by these groups in violation of US law, in violation of US sanctions. And we're really, until there's some sort of media that brings this to attention and companies realize, oh, we might be able to get in trouble here, we don't see any action. There's no proactive action on the part of these platforms. And the biggest benefactors of that are the types of entities and groups that rely on tech for propaganda. Um, I keep thinking back to more than 10 years ago now when ISIS rose, and it was this young, new extremist group using social media in a way that had never been seen before. And companies kind of created their terrorism policies that we see today in response to all of the graphic videos that were circulating from groups like ISIS on the platform. But they just created the model of using tech, and knowing that there's very little moderation. And we're seeing a decade of that lack of moderation culminating now in that the use of these platforms by terrorist groups are a profit driving aspect for these companies. So they're profiting from failing to enforce their own policies, from failing to comply with the law. And there's no other industry that would be able to get away with.
Right. Yeah, it seems like moderation, just in the events that you've mentioned, not just with Musk, but with WhatsApp, moderation seems to be in response to sunlight. And when that sunlight fades, it's back to business as usual until there's some kind of legislation, some kind of regulation on the big tech companies as a total, if you will. This being just one small facet of that. Um, I'm always curious as to what the Tech Transparency Project is currently looking at, because some of the things that you guys bring to light I think are fascinating and everybody should be aware of. What are what are maybe the one or two biggest things that you are looking at right now and trying to kind of shine some light on,
Well, the sanctions
if
issue
you
is
can,
some
if you
yeah,
can share?
yeah. The
Yeah,
sanctions issue is something that we've been obviously tracking for a while. And what I will say is there are much bigger tech companies than X that have some very serious sanctions violations that we are documenting. And it's a slow process. We don't do this with automation. We do all of this research manually. If you've ever looked at the OFAC sanctions database, there are thousands and thousands of entities and individuals there. So it's a lot to go through, but it is critical because when we look at how tech has kind of weaseled its way out of accountability for a lot of things, they've used the Section 230 shield for pretty much everything. That's actually why this big lawsuit in New Mexico with Meta is such a huge deal because it's one of the first cases that these companies have not gotten dismissed before it went to court. And they almost always get things dismissed under Section 230. And the issue with sanctions, correct, exactly. And it's using a model that makes the content of similar to what we're looking at with sanctions. The content is not the issue, and the content is what they get kind of Section 230 to get them out of. And when it comes to the sanctions violations, the content is completely irrelevant. And so Section 230 doesn't matter because it does not protect from violations of sanctions law. And so trying to look at other types of legal avenues where these companies should be complying with the law, We're also continuing to look heavily at scam advertisements on Meta platforms. This is something we've looked at quite a bit over the years. Uh, there's been a lot of reporting from some wonderful reporting from Jeff Horowitz at Reuters about Meta scam ads. He did a piece back in November that found through documents leaked to him from Meta that they determined that $16 billion of their annual revenue comes from ads for scams. Um, and that is directly impacting Americans. A lot of the ads that we look at when it comes to these scams are for scams for Medicare, scams for stimulus checks that don't exist, tariff relief checks that don't exist, and they are targeting people in people that are extremely financially vulnerable. They often target the elderly, and these are bought and paid for ads. So that's another piece that we're looking at is this is the business is the ads and really digging into the harms of the companies failing to even apply the most basic, you know, controls on that. And when we look at similar industries like banking, for instance, when it comes to scams and fraud, banks have a lot of very strict policies, legal regulations they have to comply with. And they're often the ones left cleaning up after these tech companies who make pure profit from the ads and get none of the regulatory blowback. And so that's something else that we're really digging into is the issue of the what we're seeing with advertising on these platforms.
You've got a lot of work to do, Miss Paul. And one,
Unfortunately, we do.
yeah. Um, I always like to thank you and your team for what you guys are doing. Between taking on big tech and Newtify apps, between taking on individuals and organizations who are openly funding terrorist groups through their platforms. And now what you're looking at as far as, scamming the average Americans. I think it's truly important what the Tech Transparency Project does. So I would absolutely like to thank you once again, you and your group, for what you're doing. I'm sure we'll have you on again in the future to talk about things. I would love for tech to be regulated tomorrow, and but I think we've got a couple years to wait on that, if ever. But so I think you're always going to be you're always going to be employed. So thank you for what you're doing and shining a light on all these things for average people like myself.
Well, thanks for continuing to use your platform to raise awareness on these issues because the more average people speak up, the more we're going to see a sea change. And I think we're just at the tip of that with the Newtify apps. There's now a really a groundswell in the US, in Europe, in Australia, in the UK of parents that are fed up. And I think we need more people in the US to be fed up and let people know that they are.
Yeah. So if you're fed up like I am, or people who might be fed up, please point them towards the Tech Transparency Project. Again, we did a great discussion with Katie about the Newtify apps. That is over on YouTube and Substack. Please check this out as well and share widely. They're doing really fantastic work that's going to benefit all of us and generations to come. So, once again, Katie, thanks for being here with us down in the bunker in Ohio, and wish you the best.
Thanks so much.